Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome back to this week's lesson video. And in this week's lesson, we're going to cover something that I was going to cover last week, but the etude breakdown took precedence because I just finished the pack, or the little packet I'd done for that. And I wanted to talk about navigating this and getting around a stretch. Some people who've followed my playing for a while know that my stretch or my reach is a big part of my playing. I use it for all my voicings, for my linear ideas, and it's an integral part to kind of just navigating the sound. But as such, I get a lot of questions such as, how do I play that? I can't play that. How on earth can I get close to that sound? I really love the way you play, but I can't physically play some of this stuff. And it always gets me thinking that there is a way to incorporate this stuff, and there is a way to work around it, but I'd like to do a video guiding people on maybe how you can take some of these ideas and really put your own spin on them. You don't have to torture yourself to be able to play them, and who knows, they might take you in a very different direction, and I tried to keep that in mind for the intro, using some of the concepts I'm about to break down, or the perspectives. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. And the first port of call, I would actually say, is not toss out the voicing completely. Try see if you can actually play it somewhere else on the guitar, preferably higher up. For example, this voicing over here, which I actually used as kind of the principal starting point for the intro. That's a big voicing. It's not something that's comfortable for many people, and even for myself, it took me a long time to be able to get that feeling quite natural. But what if you could play it up here? That's a lot more manageable. Or even something like this, that normally gives people trouble lower down on the instrument, is able to be done higher up on the neck. If this is possible, it means you don't have to throw out the voicing. You can keep the voicing and have it as a contrast. And it reminds me of kind of if you take like a piano and you play something like the C6 register of the piano, where pianists will sometimes take little voicings and just play them at the top of the keys and let it resonate, or the top of the range and just let it resonate. To me, it has that kind of effect, especially if you contrast it, right? And it's a great way to change up your accompaniment or your arrangements, and you can keep voicings that may be a little too difficult. Although, if that's still quite hard, because you know, it is kind of tiny, and certain voicings, especially ones that have like a lot of notes in a row like that, they become really hard to play and play reliably, so there are ways of getting around that. The second thing I would suggest is to reorganize the voicing, or refinger it. Most voicings on the instrument can be redone or played in different ways. However, I will say the closer a chord is together, for example, this one's a minor second, a major second, and a fourth, you're going to have a hard time doing a fingering or a different fingering for that chord unless you change the tuning of the instrument. But the wider voicings, or if there are a lot of fifths, a lot of sixths, then you can get away with it. For example, one big voicing I love to use a lot is a G over C, right? G triad, C bass. Now that looks uncomfortable for a lot of people, but what if I said there was a different way to play this chord? Well, I could take this D and move it over here. I could take this B and move it over here, and suddenly I've got the same voicing, just played a little differently. However, do bear in mind, I really do want people to consider this, it will change the sound of the chord. For example, when you refinger a voicing, don't be surprised if it sounds brighter or warmer or whatever it may be. For example, in this instance, these two notes over here sound warmer, rounder, because I'm playing them higher up on the neck and also on thicker strings. Whereas these are the two of the thinner strings on the instrument. So it cuts a lot more. So this has a lot more sparkle to it, or high-end shimmer, if you would, compared to this. However, that opens up different avenues, and suddenly you can take these big voicings. So one I find a lot of people struggle with, especially further down the instrument, is add 9 chords, and it's usually because of the stretch between these two fingers. So you could actually replay it like this. That might be more comfortable for some people. So really consider how you can re-finger a chord, and be curious. This will actually help your fretboard knowledge, because you'll be forced to map out where things are. Just knowing that there's a D here and then knowing the same note is over here makes a world of a difference when mapping out your fretboard. The next point is that you don't have to play every note in the chord. You can break these chords apart or break them into multiple parts or to their essential bits. So let's say I have this big voicing again. And this is actually the crux of that intro thing I was playing, where I broke down the voicing into, or right, that little idea, that started from this voicing, but I figured, okay, if I'm going to teach this concept, how can I show people you can take this big chord and then come up with something new from it that, you know, may be easier for a lot of people to handle. There's also one thing I want to impart. When it comes to injuries related to stretches or things like that, how do they usually happen? They usually happen by people tackling voicings that are too big and trying to hold the voicing, or trying to brute force their way into being able to play the chord, as such causing problems in the wrist and the tendons, right? So, what if we eliminated that? Because these, even just taking this chord, sometimes that chord in and of itself is hard for people. If I just dropped that, that alleviates a lot of tension that was in my hand and makes it easier to manage. So if you have a big 4, 5, or 6 note chord that is hard for you to play, break it down into 2 or 3 note cells, and you'll find that you might come up with some new ideas. Sure, you're not going to get the big expansiveness of the chord, and you're not going to get that huge resonant quality, but that's kind of the point of this idea. It's taking this structure and then going, what can I do with it? For example, I did this as well with this chord. Again, a chord that's tough for people, but if you break it down into or, right? Or same thing with this. Break them up into dyads. You get this really cool intervallic idea in your thing and in your playing that really lends itself to comping and movement. For example, let's say we were playing on an A minor chord. And I'll tell you, when I play live, a lot of the times I'm paring it down to 2 or 3 note voicings for the most part. Maybe when I want to make a statement or really flesh something out or really create like a big layer for someone, then I'll use the bigger chords. But then see? I'm using these little shapes and suddenly they're easier to move around and they're more rhythmic. So that's something to consider. Now the other aspect of this I would suggest is this also can apply to your single note stuff. And there's one thing I would suggest. Remember that key point I mentioned. Where do most of the injuries come from? It's from taking a big chord and holding it for too long, overworking the muscles and overworking those tendons. Well, if you're playing a big thing like this, right? Look for a different fingering if possible, but if not, try not holding on to notes as long. Sure, you might affect the flow a little bit. It might not be as seamless, right? That's a big set of jumps for a lot of people. But what if I just said, the minute I move to this note, like the minute I make that move, this finger's coming up. And actually, this is probably why I can play a lot of these passages without muscle fatigue, because something to consider even if you do have big hands, or flexible hands, should I say, you'll still run into muscle fatigue if you start holding notes down too long. So, to preserve your economy of motion, what you would do is the minute you're moving to play the next note, I'm already kind of easing up pressure on one finger and then letting it go by the time I played this note. See? If I were to slow it down, kind of like if I were to slow down the motion way down, it would essentially be like, as I'm moving to this note, there's kind of like a weight transference. It's almost like the weight is being removed from this finger slowly and it's being transferred to that finger, right? Or, right? Even when I'm doing stuff on the same string, big jumps, 5 fret stretches or more, as I'm making that jump or transition to the next note, my previous finger is coming up. So I'm not forcing my hands to hold on to things or hold on to notes while trying to reach another one. So that might be something to consider if you want to consider, okay, how can I make stretches easier in my linear playing? So in short, I hope this video was helpful for you guys. I'm going to do a breakdown of some stuff on my Patreon right now, so if you want to sign up for some of the extra stuff I have there, by all means, please feel free to join me, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, guys.